Okay, well, hello and welcome everyone. This is the UCCS Speaker Series. I'm Richard Kravitz, Director of the UC Center Sacramento. It's a great pleasure to welcome you here today. We have a number of continuing events going on through the rest of July, so please check our website at uccs.ucdavis.edu. And now we'll launch into the subject of our program. So if it wasn't clear before, the role of science in our lives is now so obvious that it's almost trite to speak of the subject, but it's not an overstatement to say that our lives and really the lives of our children will depend on science as we look to vaccines to save us from this and future pandemics, green energy technologies to combat climate change, and just as further examples, desalination and water conservation methods to help us deal with the drought. But what's also clear is that most Americans don't understand science or the scientific method, and may not even value or understand empiricism itself. And what's worse, many don't appreciate science or the scientific process. We really need everyone to understand something about science and to appreciate it for what it brings to us in society, as well as to understand the strengths and limitations of the method. And when I say everyone, that of course includes multilingual learners in the classroom. So here to address that topic, how to best introduce some of the majesty and hopefully a little bit of the fun of science to English learners is Julie Bianchini. She's professor of science education and faculty director of the CalTeach Science and Mathematics Initiative in the Department of Communication at UC Santa Barbara. She's author of many articles and the winner of several awards, including an Early Career Research Award and the Outstanding Article Award, both from the National Association for Research in Science Teaching. She received both her BS in biology and PhD in education at Stanford, and we're really delighted to have her. So Professor Bianchini, thank you for being with us, and we look forward to your remarks.
Great, thank you. I'm going to share my screen. Great. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to present my research on ways to help pre-service secondary science teachers learn to teach multilingual learners. In referring to secondary science teachers, I'm referring to teachers who teach at the middle or junior high and high school levels. I have been conducting research on equity, diversity, and inclusion in science teacher education for about 25 years now. And I have included a focus on multilingual learners for the last decade. I wanted to clarify that although I am the daughter of an Italian immigrant, I myself am not a multilingual learner. Before I continue with my presentation, I wanted to acknowledge that UCSB sits on the ancestral homelands of the Chumash people. The University of California, Santa Barbara campus is located on indigenous land, and it is important that staff, students, and faculty understand the significance of observing protocols and recognizing the traditional custodians of the land at university events and ceremonies. It demonstrates the respect the university has for the Chumash people, the history and culture of the community, and all Native Americans as Americans' first people. We acknowledge the Chumash people who are the traditional custodians of this land. We pay respect to elders, both past and present, as well as other indigenous people present. We are proud to continue their tradition today of coming together and growing as a community. Because my presentation focuses on multilingual learners, I thought it would be helpful to discuss who multilingual learner students are in science classroom. As starting points, it is important to understand that learning science means learning both disciplinary content and disciplinary language. My use of the term multilingual learners is intentional. Multilingual learners can also be referred to as English learners, English language learners, emergent bilinguals, or bilingual learners. The term multilingual learners is considered in science education to be asset-based because it recognizes that using multiple languages adds richness and diversity to the classroom. The acronym MLs or ELs is discouraged in science education as potentially dehumanizing to students who can be seen as little more than labels. As such, multilingual learners are understood to bring rich knowledge and resources to the classroom that teachers and peers should recognize and build upon. And although in science teacher education, we tend to focus on the types of instructional supports teachers should integrate into their lessons to support multilingual learners, we should emphasize that multilingual learners need to be both supported and challenged in talking and doing science. It is also important to emphasize that multilingual learners are diverse. They include not only students who recently immigrated to the US, but students born in the US who speak a home language other than or in addition to English, and students who are transnational. Multilingual learners vary along multiple dimensions, including their language and literacy backgrounds, their country of origin, their personal histories, and their socioeconomic status. In the US, over 10% of students in K-12 schools are multilingual learners, and this number continues to increase over time. In California, we have over 19% of our public school students as multilingual learners. Research in science education makes clear that multilingual learners experience learning opportunity gaps. They are often systematically excluded from learning rigorous science content or enrolling in advanced science courses. Analyses of standardized tests both show this lack of access negatively affects their science achievement, and that the standardized tests themselves can constrain what multilingual learners are able to demonstrate as their understanding of science. As a science teacher educator, my goal is to help transform science education so that all multilingual learner students have access to, engage with, and excel in rigorous science learning. I work with and conduct research on pre-service secondary science teachers, focusing on the next generation science standards to help them learn how to both support and challenge multilingual learners in their science classrooms. This quote comes from a pre-service science teacher, Lacey, at the end of her teacher education program. I will give you a minute to read this quote for yourself. This beginning teacher is a multilingual learner herself. She is a European American woman with French as her home language, but most teachers are not multilingual learners. And while being a multilingual learner provides her with some insights, she notes that learning how to teach multilingual learners is critical. She recognizes that multilingual learners contribute rich knowledge and resources to the classroom. She also recognizes that it is necessary both to implement instructional supports to provide multilingual learners access to science learning, as well as to challenge multilingual learners with rigorous science content rather than dumbing down the curriculum. So as noted in the title of my talk, I wanted to share with you an asset-based approach for pre-service science teachers to work with multilingual learners. Other science education scholars have developed similar principle-based approaches in recent years, and there's a great deal of overlap between these different frameworks. So I developed this framework with my colleagues Sarah Roberts, Jinsuk Lee, Sarah Huff, Stacy Carpenter, Valerie Meyer, and Alexis Spina to provide guidance to science teachers on how to effectively teach multilingual learners. As I move through discussion of each of these 5 principles, it is important to understand that the principles intentionally overlap and reinforce one another. So one of the principles is a safe classroom. A safe classroom is the foundation needed to implement the other 4 principles in the framework. In a safe classroom, teachers create a community of learners where all students contribute to sense-making, collaborate, take intellectual risks, and learn free of stereotypes or fear. Teachers can help to establish a safe classroom by correctly using students' preferred names, collaborating with students to create classroom norms, selecting text, videos, and visuals that offer windows, mirrors, and sliding doors so that all students can see themselves as science people, and implementing sense-making activities and productive discussions on a regular basis. The principle of student funds of knowledge is key to the asset-based approach to multilingual learner instruction. Teachers are expected to elicit, build on, and amplify student funds of knowledge by learning about their students, their families, and their communities, integrating students' knowledge and experiences into their lessons and assessments, and communicating an appreciation for the multiple languages and dialects that their students speak. Teachers can intentionally use their students' funds of knowledge by situating their lessons in local context, including family and community members in assignments and projects, and encouraging students to critically evaluate information and enact change connected to their lives and their communities. The principle of disciplinary language distinguishes just good teaching from effective teaching for multilingual learners. In attending to disciplinary language, teachers should recognize that language exists at the word, sentence, and message level. They should implement instructional supports to scaffold both the comprehension and production of language through speaking, reading, writing, listening, using visuals, and body movements. I'll be talking a lot about instructional language supports later in my talk. So for now, teachers can help their multilingual learners learn disciplinary language by implementing a range of instructional language supports, including modeling and explaining how scientists use language, providing instructional supports like gestures, graphic organizers, visuals, and sentence frames to reason about and communicate ideas, and to encourage use of multiple languages, dialects, and registers to talk and do science. The principle of cognitively demanding tasks ensures that the framework targets contemporary perspectives of science education. In particular, this principle emphasizes alignment of science instruction for multilingual learners with the next generation science standards. To ensure multilingual learners talk and do science, teachers must engage them in the NGSS practices like arguing from evidence, developing and using models, and constructing explanations. They must also emphasize the cross-cutting concepts identified in the NGSS, like patterns, structure and function, and cause and effect. Teachers can ensure their multilingual learners engage in cognitively demanding tasks by eliminating lessons that focus on defining scientific terms or memorizing scientific facts. Instead, teachers should engage their students in investigations and projects that examine relevant local phenomena. They should encourage students to reason with evidence, argue about possible explanations or models, and design solutions to real-world problems. Equally important, they should help students critically evaluate information and enact change relevant to their lives and communities. The final principle highlights the connection between content learning and language learning. In science classrooms, language development should be in the service of science understanding. So teachers should provide their multilingual learner students rich opportunities to comprehend, reason with, and communicate science content using language. Teachers can provide rich language opportunities for the multilingual learner students by planning daily opportunities to communicate verbally, in writing, through visuals, and using gestures. Strategically plan for student participation in small group and whole class discussions, and other opportunities to think and practice before presenting their ideas to a larger audience. So next, I wanted to discuss a research study on science teacher education that is framed by these 5 principles. We use these principles to understand what pre-service secondary science teachers learned about teaching multilingual learners in their teacher education program. This study, called SMTRI, investigated 6 teacher education programs in small research-intensive universities in California. The study focused on pre-service secondary science and mathematics teachers. It examined knowledge, beliefs, and practices related both to the standards, the NGSS and the Common Core, as well as equity, in particular multilingual learners. And we collected data over 4 years, from 2016 to 2020. As I already noted, the SMTRI study was informed by our principle-based framework for multilingual learners. And the findings that I'm going to talk about here come from a smaller study that was part of SMTRI, one that focused on pre-service secondary science and mathematics teachers from 4 of the teacher education programs across 2 of the 4 years of the study. And so in the smaller study, we asked, how prepared did pre-service teachers think they were to teach multilingual learners, including what sources did they identify as contributing to their preparation? Our second research question was, how did pre-service teachers understand the 5 principles for effective multilingual learner instruction? And then in our third research question, we delved down into one of the 5 principles, the principle of disciplinary language. And we examined how pre-service science teachers and mathematics teachers understood this particular principle. We had 100 pre-service teacher participants in this smaller study. They spanned 4 different universities, as I mentioned before. 3 of the teacher education programs were post-baccalaureate, 1-year credential programs. And then one of the teacher education programs was an undergraduate experimental program that spanned the 4 years of the undergraduate degree. Of the 100 participants, you could see that they constituted 58% of all pre-service secondary science and mathematics teachers enrolled in these 4 institutions. The other 72 pre-service teachers were invited to participate in our study, but declined for various reasons. The majority of our participants were female, European American, and spoke English as their first or home language. About 20% of our participants were multilingual learners themselves. Although we collected a wide variety of data for the larger SMTRI project, for this particular study, we focused on our semi-structured pre and post interviews. So these were individual interviews conducted toward the beginning and end of the pre-service teacher education program. We created verbatim interview transcripts and then qualitatively coded the interviews across multiple cycles of analysis to answer each of our 3 research questions. So we coded for perceived level of preparation and sources of preparation, pre-service teachers' understanding of the 5 principles in general, and then their understanding of the principle disciplinary language support in particular. For our first research question, We investigated both how prepared our pre-service science and mathematics teacher participants reported being to teach linguistically and culturally diverse students, and which aspects of their teacher education programs contributed to their sense of preparation. In addition, we looked to see if differences in the levels and sources of preparation varied across the 4 teacher education programs. In terms of preparation, we found that the majority of pre-service teachers reported medium to high levels of preparation, but the percentages varied by university. We found that University 2 and 3 had almost all pre-service teachers report high or medium levels of preparation. University 1 pre-service teachers were concentrated in the middle, with over 60% reporting medium levels of preparation. And then University 4 had about 40% of pre-service teachers who reported low levels of preparation. University 4 was the experimental undergraduate program. While the levels of preparation reported by teacher participants differed by university, their sources of preparation were the same. So across all 4 teacher education programs, participants identified field experiences as the most common source of preparation or lack of preparation to teach multilingual learner students. I clarified that some pre-service teachers talked about field experiences as helping to prepare them to teach multilingual learners, and some pointed to field experiences as a source of uncertainty in teaching multilingual learners. We found that 72 pre-service teachers discussed their field experiences when referring to their sense of being prepared or inadequately prepared to teach multilingual learners. Indeed, almost 50% of pre-service teachers who reported high levels of preparation talked about their field experiences and how important it was to have had the opportunity to teach multilingual learners in their classrooms. Conversely, participants who reported medium to low levels of preparation noted they had few opportunities to teach multilingual learners in their placements. We also found that 46 participants identified coursework as a common source of preparation to teach multilingual learners. Again, participants who reported high and medium levels of preparation saw their courses as helpful in learning to teach multilingual learners. Some who reported medium to low levels of preparation thought their courses, particularly their methods courses, did not examine the topic in enough detail. And others who reported medium to low levels of preparation noted they were unable to practice what they learned in their methods courses because they didn't have multilingual learners in their field placements. Here are quotes from 2 pre-service teachers who discussed limitations to either their field placements or coursework. Alexander from University 1 explained that everything he was doing with multilingual learners at this point was theoretical in his courses as opposed to practical because he didn't have multilingual learners in his placement. Brandon from University 3 noted that he wished his methods course had spent more time on multilingual learners in particular and differentiated instruction in general. I will come back to methods courses and coursework in the last part of my talk today. So moving on to research question 2, we sought to understand not only how prepared pre-service teachers thought themselves to teach multilingual learners, but also what they understood about effective multilingual learner instruction. And we found that participants discussed the principle of disciplinary language support the most often. Indeed, every participant discussed this principle. I will return to this principle in my discussion of findings for research question 3. We also found that participants discussed the 2 principles of providing students with rich language opportunities and building on student funds of knowledge at moderate rates. So across the 4 teacher education programs, more than 75% of participants discussed each of these 2 principles. Kevin from University 4 emphasized how he used small groups to provide multilingual learners with rich language production opportunities. This quote, among others, was not specific to science or mathematics, but did highlight language production opportunities and ways to support them. Shane from University 2 discussed the importance of using student funds of knowledge to make sense of a particular phenomenon in science, encouraging students to draw analogies between their own experiences and a science idea. This quote, among others that we identified, was more disciplinary specific in this case to science. Further, we found that participants discussed the principles of cognitively demanding tasks and safe classrooms at low rates. So each of these two principles accounted for less than 10% of codes for principles. And there were some differences among universities in regards to these two principles. For example, while 50 to 75% of pre-service teachers from universities 1, 2, and 3 discussed cognitively demanding tasks, less than half from University 4 did so. Moving on to research question 3, we delved more deeply into participants' understanding of disciplinary language support. Here we found that participants focused on 2 of 5 types of disciplinary language support. So they described helping students to interpret language, for example, by using visuals or multiple representations, graphic organizers, or modified language in directions or text. They also discussed helping students to produce language using sentence frames and starters, word walls, modeling and examples, or alternative ways of expressing their understanding. For example, Tessa from University 1 described how she helped multilingual learners access text by chunking text into smaller units, having students talk about the text with their partner after reading them, having one student summarize what was read for the class, and then moving on to the next small chunk of text. Jasmine from University 2 explained how she modified a writing task to help multilingual learners more easily produce language, encouraging them to draw and explain a diagram as part of their argument. Again, we found that some of the supports pre-service teachers discussed were generic, such as the first quote, and might or might not tie to core ideas, practices, and cross-cutting concepts specified in standards documents like the NGSS. We also found that some of the supports our pre-service teachers implemented were specific to science or mathematics, such as the second quote, where Jasmine helped her students argue from evidence by allowing them to draw their ideas as well as write about them. We also found that participants across the teacher education programs focused less on the following 3 types of supports: organizing instruction, for example, differentiating, adjusting instruction to students' needs or language proficiencies levels, providing individual or extra instruction. Also validating students' home languages and dialects by using translations, encouraging multiple language and dialects, and moving across registers when talking and doing science. And then creating a meaningful context for language use, for example, starting with a phenomenon, connecting to home communities or everyday life, and addressing a socio-scientific issue. Indeed, creating a meaningful context for language use was the least often discussed of the 5 types of language supports. So in terms of implications for policy and practice from this smaller study that was conducted as part of SMTRI, one of the things our findings suggest is that teacher education programs in California, at least the teacher education programs that we studied, do prepare pre-service secondary teachers to teach multilingual learners. This was supported by our finding that across universities, the majority of pre-service teachers reported meeting to high levels of preparation in teaching multilingual learners. And across universities, participants understood effective multilingual learner instruction to be multidimensional, in particular attending to disciplinary language, using rich language production opportunities, and addressing students' funds of knowledge. And then finally, across universities, we found pre-service teacher participants identify different types of disciplinary language support, in particular the two types of supports of helping students interpret language and helping students produce language. Our findings also suggest that teacher education programs could do more to align theory and practice, as well as science learning and language learning. More specifically, programs should ensure all pre-service secondary teachers have the opportunity to teach multilingual learners in their placements. Programs should also emphasize the principle of cognitively demanding tasks so that multilingual learner students are both challenged and supported in their learning of science or mathematics. And programs should emphasize more types of instructional language supports, in particular, creating meaningful context for language use, again, to both support and challenge multilingual learners in learning science. So in the last part of my talk, I wanted to discuss a second study. This study is in progress and investigates ways to make the principle-based framework work better for pre-service science teachers and their multilingual learner students. So the study that I'll briefly discuss here is also part of a larger research project, this time called STELLER. And in STELLER, we are investigating, again, pre-service secondary science and mathematics teachers, but in this case, we're just looking at pre-service teachers at one university in California. And we are examining their understanding of teaching multilingual learners using the 5 principles of effective multilingual learner instruction, as well as instructional language routines, which I'll discuss more in a minute. Our collection analysis of data is ongoing. We've been collecting data as part of STELLER since 2015. So again, the study that I'll be talking about here uses the 5 principles of effective multilingual learner instruction. And then it also draws from the construct of instructional language routines. So instructional language routines come from mathematics education, and they provide structured ways for students to regularly and productively engage with science and mathematics concepts and practices. They organize tasks and amplify language so that multilingual learners can access rigorous content, engage in productive discussions, optimize their language production opportunities, and make connections across content and language. Examples of instructional language routines that we have been using as part of STELLER include co-craft questions and problems, 3 reads, stronger and clearer, and clarify, critique, and correct. So this smaller study that I'm discussing here, connected to STELLER, investigates pre-service science and mathematics teachers over 2 years, from 2019 to the present. We're asking 2 research questions. How do pre-service teachers use different instructional language routines to highlight one or more of the 5 principles of effective multilingual learner instruction? And then what do pre-service teachers learn about how to both support and challenge their multilingual learner students? Currently, there are 28 pre-service teacher participants in this smaller study. They are split between male and female. The majority are European American. The majority are also speak English as their first language. We've collected a variety of data. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic, we have been unable to observe pre-service teacher participants actually teach principle-based, disciplinary specific language routines in their classrooms. So we've been collecting lesson plans, weekly written reflections that they complete during their science or mathematics methods course, video recorded rehearsals of their instruction without students present, and then for a subset of participants, individual interviews. We are qualitatively coding data across multiple cycles of analysis to answer our 2 research questions. So because the instruction is different for the mathematics pre-service teachers and the science pre-service teachers, and because I'm a science teacher educator, I will focus on the science methods course and the science instruction here. So during a science methods course, we engage the pre-service teachers as science learners themselves in a unit on school water pathways. The unit's purpose is to understand the complexity of the water cycle, the way water moves through different systems on the earth. The phenomenon that is investigated is rain falling and then pools of water disappearing from school grounds. So we contextualize the unit on a school campus, and the driving question is, where does the water that falls on our school campus go? So the purpose of the unit is to help pre-service teachers think about ways of supporting and challenging their multilingual learners, ways of using language for learning rigorous science content. And this is an example of principle-based science-specific support that is included in the school water pathways unit. So prior to going outside to mapping the school grounds to determine different types of surfaces that exist at their school, students work in groups, so the students are the pre-service teachers, to determine potential pathways for water from a specific location on their campus, such as the water in a puddle on a soccer field. And students use the pathways reasoning tool, which you can see on your left, to trace water forward and backward from that specific location, tracing water along multiple pathways. As they move more distally from the location of interest represented in the center square, the pathways become more branching and divergent. So we pair use of that reasoning tool with the stronger and clearer language routine. So students do an individual pre-write where they fill out the pathways tool. Then they have time to think and decide and rehearse what they will say about their writing and drawing to their peers. They participate in several pair shares with a partner where they share their ideas, listen to their partner's ideas, and ask probing questions. And then in the end, students return to revise their pathways tool to more thoroughly trace the multiple pathways water takes from their target context, to solidify the thinking and talking they practiced and refined in their pair shares. Use of the combined tool and routine engages students in conversations and scientific arguments about from where water on their school campus comes from and where it goes. This is an example of a second principle-based science-specific support that we have included in the school water pathways unit. And in this case, students would complete this combined reasoning tool and language routine after they have engaged in planning and carrying out an investigation about how water infiltrates into different surfaces. The purpose of the drivers and constraints tool is to support students in considering why and how water moves along specific pathways. In the clarify, critique, and correct language routine, students are given a partially filled out drivers and constraints tool that either their teacher has, in this case, the methods instructor has developed themselves or has pulled from a previous student. And students first clarify the reasoning of the initial response. They then critique the response by identifying both strengths and weaknesses. And then they correct the student's work collaboratively with partners to write an improved response. By engaging in this combined reasoning tool and language routine, students are given structured practice in thinking and talking about the various drivers of water movement. This combined tool can help teachers support their students in developing both fluency in disciplinary language and deep conceptual understanding. So as I mentioned, this research project is ongoing, and so we do not yet know how useful these combined reasoning tools and instructional language routines might be in helping multilingual learners learn disciplinary content and language. We are trying to determine what kinds of principle-based, science-specific support pre-service teachers can effectively learn and use in their classrooms, and we are trying to determine how such supports might help multilingual learners develop deep content understanding and fluency in their disciplinary language. So just to wrap up, I wanted to thank my UCSB colleagues and my UCSB current and former graduate students who have helped with both of these research projects. And then I wanted to invite you to email me if you had any questions or follow-up ideas to share with me. And so thank you for listening, and I will stop sharing my screen.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Professor Bianchini, for just a fantastic presentation today. And so I'm just going to go ahead and give a pause here just so that Sandra can go ahead and stop the recording.